Hey everybody, this is Freddie with LeviathanScuba.com. You know what? There's so much information out there that a newer diver thinking about renting or buying their gear, it's a very common question. We'll get to it in just a minute. Hey there. So a very common question we get asked all the time, especially newer divers, they're going on their first trip and things, and they're like, do I rent my gear? Should I buy my gear? And it's a tough question to answer. The answer comes from really what your intentions are, your goals are, and things like that. So hopefully this video, we're going to cover those things to help you make up your mind. Before I get going though, I want to do a shout out here to our friends at Cayman Brac Beach Resort, right? Reef divers. And I don't know if you know, or if you've noticed in our videos, but every video we have a different hat up there. And we like to, give a shout out to those people that we go and we use. I love that resort. It's a great place to go. We'll have a resort review done shortly for that location. But I wanted to say that if you're from a military unit and you want to see your hat up here for one of our reviews or tips and tricks or how-tos or something, send it off to us. We'll put it in a video and we'll use it and we'll give you guys a shout out too. Or a resort, or if, I don't want a hotel chain. I'm not advertising, for people, but I'll put the hat up there. It's kind of fun. Sometimes, I wear the t-shirts to the different places on the videos. It's kind of fun. So, okay, we'll get back to whether I buy or whether I rent my gear. Let's start out with renting, and I'll start out with some of the advantages of renting gear. First of all, you don't have to travel with it. It's waiting for you wherever you're going to go. Okay? So you save space in your luggage, you save weight. It's a little more convenient to go out there and your gear's sitting there waiting for you. Okay? Up front, it's way cheaper, right? You're going to have a very low bill to rent your gear versus perhaps an expensive bill if you were to buy it all before your trip. Okay? Usually, because rental gear in dive resorts and dive destinations, it wears out. So one of the benefits of it wearing out is they have to replace it more often than personal gear of people. Therefore, they're usually buying something on the newer end, the newer scale. Okay? And that can be an advantage. You're getting something, at least modern technology to try out. And that brings me to the other, you get different brands to try, different features to try. Even though most of the time the rentals are on the cheaper end of things, the more basic, more affordable pieces of gear, you will get to try a few different types of pieces of gear. So some of the disadvantages of renting your gear would be long-term, it's more expensive, right? If you have to rent every single time you go, then the more you go, the more it costs you. Makes sense. So if you're going to dive more, then you might consider the purchase side of things. Often the gear is extremely used and serviced poorly. People ask me, Freddie, should I rent my gear? And I go, well, if you're going to rent from us before you go. Take it with you, right? You lose one of your advantages of rental gear, which it's waiting for you down there. But the reason I say that to people is our gear is new. And we keep it newer all the time, well-serviced, all that. So I know it. But that is a negative, that when you get to the destination and you find that 2-year-old regulator that's already been used 2,000 or 3,000 times, and the BCD and things like that, sometimes they're serviced very poorly, and that's a disadvantage. And I kind of mentioned it. Oftentimes, a dive operator will buy the cheapest gear they can. That's how they make money. If they can rent it 100 times and then it's paid for, then when they rent it 1,000 times, it's really paid for. But if they buy something that costs less, it might only take 40 times to have it paid for. You see what I'm saying? So it's often the cheapest gear you can get. Another disadvantage is that you're not used to it. You might have trained with certain kinds of gear, a certain brand, a certain breathability of the regulator. I had somebody the other day that actually didn't like the inflator on this new BC because they were trained with another BC and the buttons were in a different place. So that gives you an idea what I'm talking about. You're not used to it. It's not the same that you learned on. And a dive computer, that's a huge disadvantage every time you're on a dive trip. You have to learn a new dive computer, and that is if the place even rents them at all, right? Now this next one's a little creepy and people say it, and it is true, and I don't say this to scare you, but they may or may not have been sanitized. You know, we're going through this COVID thing right now when I'm filming this, and you know, people are a little creeped out by germs, but long term in the dive industry, you know, people throw up through a regulator. Hopefully the dive place really cleaned it out well, even though diving is going to clean it out well too underwater. But also many mouths on the regulator. How about peeing in wetsuits? Now I know you're like, okay, great, I'm not renting, I'm buying. But reputable dive shops and dive operators, they're going to sanitize the gear in between. We do. When we get a reg back from a student, we sanitize it. It gets completely de-germed and soaked and things like that. Wetsuits, it's easy. We know people are going to pee in wetsuits, right? Only two kinds of divers, those that pee in their suit and those that lie about it. So there's products made for that. Enzymes that just eat it up. There's nothing left. Bacterially, they are clean. They're perfect, okay? And a reputable shop's going to do that. I'm going to say that if you're smelling the suit, you shouldn't smell the suit. It shouldn't have an odor. If you're smelling the suit, I'd think about maybe renting your gear from somewhere else, okay? So let's go on. There's some decisions you need to make. Decisions you need to make whether you buy or whether you rent, and maybe we can help with that. How often are you going to dive? The number of dives on your gear is going to determine whether it's worth it for you to outlay the cash. And we're going to go through those numbers here in just a minute. Or if it's better to just rent every time. If you're only going to dive one time, this is the only vacation you're ever going to dive, you're doing it for your husband and you don't really want to dive and you never, maybe renting your gear is the most affordable choice, okay? If you think you might like it, you might get into it, and you're going to exceed a certain number of dives, which we'll go through some of those numbers in a second, then maybe you do want to purchase, okay? Now, which gear will you own versus which gear will you rent? Some people come in, they buy the whole package, everything. They've got it all. That's against our recommendation. It's nice to get that sale. However, our recommendation usually is to go slow and research the gear well and buy it a piece at a time, unless you get a package deal and you already know a couple items you want or something. But it's just generally better to focus on a piece of gear, determine what your needs are really, and buy it. I've seen people say, but I want it all the same brand. Okay, what if this brand's regulator is really, really good, but their dive computer sucks, right? There is a brand out there, they don't even make a dive computer that's air integrated. I wouldn't use one of their dive computers because I want an air integrated dive computer. But their mask is my favorite mask, right? And I use their gear. So, which gear will you own versus which? You can rent some. If you bought all your gear but a BC, then buy the BC last and rent it until then, okay? Next thing to think about is what gear is mandatory for your needs, right? Are you diving warm water only? Well, don't buy a 5 or 7 mil wetsuit unless you typically freeze, right? If you have no fat on your bones at all and 80-degree water makes you cold, then you might need a thicker wetsuit, but a 3 mil might work. If you dive in a place, you live in a tropical location where the water is 84, 85 degrees, maybe all you need is a skin instead of a 3 mil wetsuit or something like that, okay? Your mask, what kind of a mask do you want to use for what you're going to do? Personal mouthpiece, I talked a little bit about that. That's what some people, when they rent gear, they don't like the idea it's been in 100 mouths, so they just buy a mouthpiece for $6 and they put it on their rental reg and then they take it off and bring it back home with them and put the rental reg mouthpiece back on. So things like that. Okay, so next let's talk a little bit about the advantages of owning your own gear. Okay, long term, owning your own gear is less expensive, and as I mentioned, we'll go over the numbers in just a minute. But you also get used to your gear. It's yours. You know where the buttons are. You know, without even looking, you know, that you have this kind of inflator or secondary air source, right? That sort of thing. You like the comfort. You purchase your own Comfort Bite mouthpiece or molded mouthpiece, different, you know what I'm saying? You just get used to your own gear. The first thing you'll notice when you try a rental regulator, because they're the cheapest gear you can buy, the dive shops buy them bulletproof, super tough, so they're dropped on the concrete all the time, they don't break and things, but you buy a nice regulator and you breathe out of it, and it's such a luxury, it almost breathes for you, right? So there's a huge difference. And it becomes comfortable. You just get used to it. So much so that if you ever did a different regulator, you'd go, oh, this just isn't the same. Okay? You get to choose the particular pieces that you enjoy, and you have the features that are important to you. So if you haven't seen our videos on the dive gear guide, we don't talk good or bad. We talk all the features that are available that are out there. For example, a BCD. You can buy a full jacket BCD. That might have been what you've trained in. But there's also a back inflate BC, a travel BC. There's these different features. So check that video out and it'll go into the buying guide, so at least you kind of know what you're hunting. If you've never tried a travel BC, hey, you might like it, right? But you get to choose that one that breathes just the way you like it, or it has the adjustability, or you really don't care about that, so you just buy a regular one, you know, things like that. Some of the features of different wetsuits are even different, right? Some have cuffs with a zippered over cuff that zippers close, and they're semi-dry. Some of them have a zipper in the neck. That's a very popular feature because people just hate it when it's all up around their neck, right? And then they trim it or it splits or something. So anyway, I'm just saying, do a little research and you get to buy the particular pieces, the ones that are just the way you like it. The next thing is, you know, dealing with that creepy germs thing. Your gear, an advantage of owning is they're your cooties. They're your germs. You can tolerate your germs better than other people's germs, okay? Enough said. And one that most people don't think about is there's a little bit of a resale value there. You get into a piece of gear, you're into it, you feel like you've got your money's worth, but you're ready to move on to something a little better, the next level, something like that, and you decide you're going to sell it. Okay, you're going to recoup some of your money, where you could never do that with rental gear. Okay, the disadvantages of owning your own gear. I want you to be aware that there is an ongoing cost to some extent. Everybody has some version of maintenance that needs to be done on the equipment. Now, I'll confess to you, I personally believe people should service their equipment more than they do, but that's because I own a dive shop and I get to see people coming in and they're full of salt or this or that. I've seen junk inside a regulator that looks alien, right? But lubrication dries up. O-rings split and crack, and rubber tears, and it gets really thin. Diaphragms stretching over and over. How many thousands or tens of thousands of breaths have pushed it out, sucked it in, pushed it out, so, you know. And I'll tell you, you don't want to find out that your gear needs serviced when you're on vacation, because it's a lot more money. And sometimes they just don't have the wherewithal to service your gear. They might not have a dive shop, or they might not have parts for your brand of regulator, things like that. So that can be a disadvantage. The service costs that you might consider, and every place is a little different, but you know, a BCD, to service a BCD ranges from $25 to $35. Depending on what you need to do to it. Service on a regulator is around $99, and that includes first stage, second stage, and your octopus, whether it's on your BC or, you know, on a hose on your regulator, somewhere around there. Regulators have a service interval. Many are 1 year, so you service them every year, and that's a good idea to do so. It It doesn't depend on as much as how often you use it. Sometimes because, like I say, they dry up, they tear, the rubber gets brittle, it cracks, things like that. But some regulators have intervals of 2 years. The T3 regulator by Atomic has a 3-year service interval. I think it's the only one. But you wouldn't have to service it but every 3 years. Okay, so there is a little bit of an ongoing cost. Another disadvantage of owning your own gear is travel. Now, I mentioned to you that those of us that dive a lot, we're so used to it, it's normal. You know, we'll bring fewer swimsuits to be able to pack our dive gear. And we get very used to packing all our dive gear in one suitcase, and still we get to bring a little bit of clothes up there for our 50-pound limit. And but there's weight and space to contend with when you're bringing dive gear with you. And the last, and it's kind of minor, but as long as you own your gear, it's going to age, which means modern technology comes out, the latest and the greatest features and benefits come out, so there might be something that comes out you like better in the future. And also the gear ages, but it's very common to have people service their regulators that are 20, 25 years. They love them, they get used to them. That's like me. If you saw my BCD, you'd be embarrassed to dive with me probably, right? If I'm not demoing a BC out there, I'm bringing my personal BC. I don't know how many dives it has on it. I really don't. It's years old, and it's so faded. At one point, a lot of it was red, and now it's some shade pastel, pinkish thing. And even the black isn't black anymore. It's kind of a gray or a charcoal or things like that. I should replace it one of these days, but that's what I'm talking about, the benefit of ownership. It's not that I'm cheap. Heck, I own a dive shop. I can have any BC I want. It's that I get the gear that I love. I love my BC. My favorite regulator in the whole wide world, they haven't made for over 15 years. I had numerous service kits so I could keep it going until some of the hard parts wore out. Now I can't even service my reg. And I love that reg. So you do get kind of used to your gear, and that is a benefit. So let's talk a little bit about the numbers, right? The points to ponder is what I'm calling this. Okay, so a typical rental for a regulator is around $15 a day. $25 a day if it includes a dive computer, okay? Which many resorts don't do that. Some do. More are starting to, but computers are expensive to replace if somebody drops it on the concrete and things like that. May ding your credit card if you do that, because they'll hold you responsible. But a BCD rents for $15 to $25 a day, and about $15 for a wetsuit for a day, so you're around $65 a day. Now, 5-day dive trip, or 7-day dive trip is 5 days of diving, so 5 days of diving is around $325 for an entire week. Now, it can make a difference on where you're traveling. For example, in Phuket, Thailand, you're only talking about $125 a week, so it's really cheap. I will say something, though. When you get there, their gear is usually well used, well past its service life, and I wouldn't dive with it a lot of times unless you just happen to catch it when they replaced it recently. Australia, it's around $375 a week. California is around $410 a week. And I'm not even using any of the higher end resorts or anything like that. Just some of your average shops and things like that. Okay? Now, you can purchase your basic quality, average quality equipment. BCD, regulator, octopus, wetsuit, a very basic dive computer for around $1,200 to $1,500, which that would save you money at 4 rental weeks or around 20 days of diving. On the upper end of that, it would save at about 5 or 25 dives, okay? 25 days of diving. Now, your gear is going to last a very long time. And the better you take care of it, the longer it's going to last. I know divers, I would consider them professional because they work on resorts. They dive 6 days a week. Usually 2 to 3 dives a day minimum, sometimes more. They have 4,000 dives on a BCD. It's lasted them 4,000 dives. Now they take care of it and they get it serviced regularly. The dive shop services it for them. And they do replace parts and pieces and things like that, but the point is they last a very, very long time. We typically get regulators in 20 to 25 years old, so people are using them for a very, very long time. Now, wetsuits are a little different. People hate to throw them away because they're done, they're finished, they're over, but they still look brand new. Why would you throw away a wetsuit that looks brand new? Because they're rated by how many dives they last. So a scuba wetsuit is made of closed cell neoprene. When you go down deeper, those cells compress, and when they come back, they rebound, but only a certain number of times. So we have a suit that we sell for anywhere from $99 to another suit that's about $119. It's good for 100 dives. I don't recommend that suit to many people unless they're just going to go on this one trip, or it would take them 5 or 6 years to get in 100 dives. But let me tell you, when they're finished, it looks almost new. But it doesn't keep them warm anymore. It may protect them from jellyfish stings, but it's not going to keep them warm anymore. No thermal qualities anymore after 100 dives. Now, other wetsuits, same thickness, just different quality neoprene. They may last 500 dives. Now, they're going to cost more. They have more quality built into them, okay? So you can also buy a regulator anywhere from $150 all the way up to, I think the most expensive regulator I know is approaching $2,000 right now. And that gives you an idea. I personally wouldn't dive the $150 one. I am going to do a review of that one soon to show people because I think it's almost dangerous to dive. But I don't necessarily recommend the most expensive one either. It's not about the price you pay. Your needs are going to change with time. You dive right now, you might be brand new, or you might have been diving, you have 100 dives under your belt, and it's time to buy your own gear. As your experience grows, so will your taste in gear. We try to help you not purchase gear twice, right, without wearing it out first. I hope you're wearing it out. Okay? You can buy pieces at a time. You don't have to buy the whole package. I think I mentioned that before, but the point of that is do your research, buy the right gear. Don't just buy a package that somebody else put together. Buy your own package. If the dealer will give you a package discount, that's great. Or simply buy the parts and the pieces that you want for yourself. I mentioned how some manufacturers don't make gear that I'd want to dive all their gear pieces, but some of their gear pieces are the best there is. They're phenomenal. Okay? Some types of diving requires different gear. A tropical wetsuit, it's not going to work under the ice. An ice diving wetsuit or dry suit is going to be way too warm in the tropics. That's an easy explanation, but how about a reg? Do you know that a regulator can be sealed or unsealed, and do you know why? If you don't, figure that out before you buy your regulator, because the same exact regulator that comes sealed is more expensive than the unsealed. I don't dive a sealed regulator. I own one for a certain type of diving, but that's what I'm saying. You need to figure out the types of diving you're going to do. One of the first questions I ask people when they come in to buy gear, are you a recreational diver, or are you going to do any kind of measure of professional diving, like a dive master or an instructor or something like that? It's one of the first. Or where are you going to dive? Are you warm water? Are you going to dive colder water? Believe it or not, Hawaii is still chilly. And so some of the gear that we send people with or they buy for diving Hawaii is a little beefed up, a little thicker wetsuits, things like that. Okay? Diving Colorado, you're going to need a sealed reg if you're going to dive it at all in the wintertime. Okay? So the last piece of advice I want to give you really is beware of buying used equipment, period. Online, it can be dangerous to buy, and I don't mean danger, and I'm not, this is a tough one, right? I mean, I own a dive shop. I want you to buy it from me. Okay, great. However, you live far away. I want you to buy it from your shop. Not just to keep them in business, which they should, but Every time somebody brings me used gear they want to sell me, it has to go through me first because I'm going to analyze the gear. What am I looking for? I want to make sure it's modern. I can't tell you how many BCs come to my shop that people want to sell me that don't even have integrated weight pockets anymore, which means for the most part, they're probably 20 years old. I don't buy them. I don't buy any BCDs without weight pockets anymore. I am not a fan of wearing a weight belt. Unless you're in a dry suit, okay? For the trolls out there that want to grill me, I just don't like wearing a weight belt. It's another buckle. It's another thing. They slide down. They're just a hassle and headache and a frustration. There's a reason why integrated weights were invented for BCDs. Okay? So I don't buy them. When they don't sell it to me, where do you think they take it next? They take it out on the internet and they advertise it. And they say it's great shape. I also look at BCDs. One of the things, we have a camera we put down inside the bladder of the BCD. The number one killer of a BC is from the inside, not the outside. So they rinsed it really good. They took great care of it. And I look inside and the bladder is shredded, or it's starting to shred. The salt has eaten it up, or the chlorine has eaten it up. That BC is no good, in my opinion. But on the outside, it looks beautiful. You could take a picture of it, put it on the internet, say, I hardly ever dove it. I don't care if you dove it once. If you stored it and had salt water on the inside, which is extremely common, every dive you're going to get some in there. If you don't clean it just right on the inside, then you can ruin the BC. You can just sit in the closet for 5 years. You only dove it once. Okay. So I also get those divers, unfortunately, that bring their gear to me to service it because they bought it online. And I look at them and I go, they haven't made parts kits for this regulator for 5 years, which means it's at least 15 years old, even though it's in great shape. Can't be serviced anymore unless I go out and I hunt the parts and, whatever. I'm just saying, be very, very careful when you buy online. I say go and keep the dive shops in business. They're going to treat you right. And they're going to have modern gear, and they're going to know the technology that's out there. And you're not going to get taken just by a cheap price. And I'm not saying that everybody out there is trying to rip somebody off. Many of these people sell their gear very innocently online, thinking genuinely in their heart that it's in great shape. And sometimes it just might be so old you're going to get, one dive out of it or a trip out of it. And if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. Alrighty? I hope the video's helped. The next video in this little section is what to buy first. If you've decided that you want to purchase, then go check that video out on where do you start? What piece of gear do I buy first? Alrighty? Make it a great day. The difference between a new diver and an experienced diver is often the tips and tricks they learn along the way. That's why we do this, make you a better diver. If you can think of somebody else that might benefit from these tips and tricks, why don't you share it with them? And you know how you can help us? Hit that like button. And if you want to be notified when the next one comes out, hit the subscribe button. Make it a great day.